Hello from the Heartland. My name is Jenna, and this is Smarter News. News when it matters and why it matters. Our Smarter series features unique people who help us think and live smarter. Good morning. Hope you're off to a great day wherever you are. Welcome to our weekly debrief where we get to take a deep breath and take a look at the news, slow down a little bit. I like to give you quick, concise, nonpartisan information, but every once in a while you do need that deep breath to really look through some of the headlines. And I really want to make sure that the news works for you. And that includes taking some of your questions and going where you would like us to go. So where part of the week I focus on, well, what are some of the editorial judgments that we have to make? What stories should we prioritize? That's the sort of stuff that I do during the week. But I always want a space for you too, where you get to actually be our producers and say, these are the stories that I'm most interested in. Can we learn more about that? And that's what we're going to do today. So I got a lot of great questions. We are going to cover a lot of ground. We always do, but we're going to cover a lot. Just like buckle up. It's going to be fun. Hope you got your coffee, get some water, do what you need to do. We're going to be here for you. So we're going to go all around the world with some of your questions. And I actually got a great question to start off that you guys always ask the best questions, but this one really got to me because one of you said, what's a news cycle? Like, what is a news cycle? And I thought, that's a term that I use all the time. I've never slowed down to explain it. And I don't think anyone ever really explained it to me. And I have a master's in journalism. What is a news cycle? Why does everyone keep talking about it? And I think the term news cycle probably made more sense when we weren't in this constant bombardment of news on a regular basis. So you could actually say a news cycle could be isolated for a particular point of day, or you're trying to look at a particular time frame. And really the way that information is moving and news is moving so quickly, that's tough to make the case for a news cycle. We're kind of constantly in a news cycle, sort of like we're constantly in a life cycle. So here's how I want you to envision a news cycle. A news cycle, imagine if everyone was standing over a drain and people were holding big pots of paint and they were pouring paint into the sink. And you sort of see this swirl of different colors. This is the news cycle. Just envision that. There's different storylines, different colors that are being poured into the middle and it's cycling around. You're kind of moving, these stories are kind of mixing into each other. And then eventually one's going down the drain and kind of moving out and you got a new one coming in. And yes, there are different times that people try to drive the news cycle. For example, the White House, whoever's in the White House, Republican or Democrat, they may try to drive the news cycle. They're going to bring up a topic that they really want to talk about. They're going to get that gallon of paint and they're going to pour it in, but maybe no one's interested, right? So that might go down the drain sooner than another one. You might get an unexpected gallon of paint, like a war that maybe you didn't expect to have to cover. That's something that we're really sitting with. And that is not just a pot, that's a constant stream of information. So I like to think of a news cycle as constantly moving and developing. You never know when a news story is going to come up. You also don't know when the stories are going to sort of fall away. And what I like to do as a journalist is try to look at all these different colors of these stories and think about, well, which are the ones that you need to know most or most valuable to you if you have a short period of time, but also take a look on how some of these stories are interacting with each other, because they are. We're not in these lanes. The colors are mixing together on a regular basis. So I like that imagery. I hope it works. I'm going to think about it a little bit more, but that's a news cycle, right? Different streams, different colors of information coming in, moving around each other. Some are falling off. Some new ones are coming in. Sometimes there's a constant stream of one color for several months or a couple of years, like the pandemic. Sometimes you're just getting a blip. And that's what makes it difficult sometimes in journalism to understand, well, where do you want to invest the time and how valuable is it for our audience? So the first thing I want to do today, let me just map out how we're going to go through our conversation. We're going to go and hit some of the really big topics. We're going to talk about the war in Ukraine. We're going to talk about the pandemic. Some of you had questions about the COVID variant. You had questions about immigration. We're going to hit two top criticisms of two different political figures. That includes Hunter Biden as well as former President Trump. And then we're going to take another deep breath and talk about one of the big culture stories of the week. And this is a story that started with the Academy Awards. And some of you have mixed feelings about this story. I actually think there is news on this story, and I think it's worth a little bit of a deeper dive, but with a friend. So Carlos Whittaker hopefully will jump on with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because Carlos talks about all sorts of things that matter to this story. And I think just one thing that we don't do a great job of when it comes to the news, I don't know your belief system. your faith system, right? But we also can't talk a lot about news stories without going deeper into some of the very basics of how we believe we should treat each other, and those values and talking about that sometimes don't get the coverage that it needs with some of the top headlines. So just want to throw that out there. Carlos is particularly good at that. He's good at a lot of things, including spider killing, I think, is one of the things that was listed on his bio. So we'll ask him about that as well. First of all, I want to talk to you about the story that I wasn't expecting that a lot of you asked about, and that is food shortages. A lot of you are concerned about food shortages. You must be hearing a lot about this, whether in your local news or otherwise. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing as far as food shortages and supply because of what's going on with the war in Ukraine. So let me just show you this real quick. Here's a map we're going to take a look at. We like to look at it every week. This gives you an idea. The red areas are the Russian areas. If you see that part to the far right, just above Mariupol, that is the Donbas region, or the Donbas territory. If you hear that term, that is the territory that has more or less been at war with Russia, a contested territory since 2014. The rest of the red, though, with the exclusion of Crimea, that Russia also annexed in 2014, is the areas that are under attack. And so one of the things that we're paying close attention to is whether or not these peace talks that we saw earlier this week that are set to continue tomorrow could change some of where Russia is attacking. There are mixed reports about whether or not Russia is pulling back from Kyiv, but there looks to be heavier bombardment in other areas. Marcus Yam is one of my favorite photojournalists to follow. I found him in Afghanistan. I wasn't in Afghanistan, but I found his work covering Afghanistan. He is still in Ukraine. If you have a chance to follow him, you should. Yam Photo. This is just an example of a photo he's taken over the last 24 hours. He's dating his photos by day. He's giving you a little bit of a summary of what's taking place, and the areas he's traveling in, or his work is just remarkable. This gives you an idea, although you might be hearing about the quote unquote withdrawal or a change in Russian strategy, that there is still very much Russian attacks happening in a wide part of the country. And there's a great concern as well that Mariupol, this key coastal area, we'll take a closer look, could fall to Russia in the next couple days. If you haven't listened to our interview with the maritime historian, put that on your list. I know it's not something I would never be like, I can't wait to hear an interview by a maritime historian. Like, it would never be on the top of my list. This was fascinating, and it gave me such a better education about what is going on in Ukraine and why it matters and how it ties to your food supply. So Mariupol is right at a key part of this particular sort of bay that is off of the Black Sea. What comes into this area are the railroad tracks, the delivery of Russian and Ukrainian goods. And in order to get out to the Black Sea and out to the broader waterways, you got to go here. So if Ukraine holds this major port, that's a big win, but Russia wants that control, because right now Russia's stopped up too, right? Russia can't move a lot of goods, and this is one of the reasons why this particular area is really key to watch, not only for the conflict and what it means symbolically, but also what it means for us and what it means for our food supply. So one of the things that we learned from that interview is that a quarter of the world's wheat comes from Russia and Ukraine. Sunflower production, right? Sunflower oil, there's a large production in Ukraine. Russia also is one of the world's supplier of fertilizer. So you're already seeing certain goods. Think about what grain is in so much. If a quarter of the world's grain supply is disrupted because of this war, that impacts a lot of different food products. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this map so you can see this. I'm going to put it up here because why not? Let's just be old fashioned about it, right? So here's Russia and Ukraine and Turkey. What I just want to point out to you is this, Russia and Ukraine are right above Africa and the Middle East, and that's where a lot of the wheat supply goes. But if those countries pull back, it has to be backfilled by others. And you say, okay, great, that's great opportunity for the American farmer, right? Well, maybe, but the American farmer's been under a lot of stress, just like everybody else, including with the higher fuel prices, higher fertilizer prices. And you can't just snap your fingers, plant more crops. There's a season for all of this as well. So there's a question about disruption, especially going towards the end of the year. You're already seeing higher prices for things like oil and meat. The question question is, how widespread does it get? How does it affect us at the kitchen table as well? And that's it's quite frankly kind of a big unknown right now. How long does this war last? There seems to be some early reports that there were some shipments moving from farms from Ukraine out. And that would be a sign that maybe some work is continuing, but we don't really know. And let's face it, we're only about 5-6 weeks really into the conflict to understand, well, how devastating is this to some of the areas in Ukraine that are not necessarily under attack? So the big thing with that is to be determined. Nothing, we're not ringing the alarm bells, but it's definitely something that we have to watch. And if you're a farmer out there, I'd like to talk to you about this, because farmers are definitely underrepresented in the news. Everyone needs your food and no one knows how to farm. And some of the comments I'm seeing through reports from non-farmers are like, oh, well, they're just going to take advantage of the price, the pricing opportunity. I'm like, I don't know. There could be a bad storm, there could be a drought. There could be all sorts of things that could happen to farmers. So there's a lot of pressure on food supply and food pricing overall. And I know that's something that you've been experiencing, especially through the pandemic. So Becca was asking about the COVID variant, new COVID variant, subvariants that you've heard about, right? There's only how many are we going to be able, we're going to memorize by the end of the pandemic, hopefully the end of the pandemic soon. This is a subvariant of Omicron. This is what they're talking about in Europe, when you're seeing a rise in cases in Europe. Are we seeing the stresses and the hospitalization, a rise in deaths? We're not seeing that necessarily yet, but we also know that data is delayed. So we need to pay close attention to what's happening in Europe, because we tend to see that in the United States in the next couple weeks. And just a note for all of you in the South, one of the things that we've seen in Texas in June and July has been a rise of infections, where sometimes you see that in New York during this particular time, the cold weather season, or the East Coast. So I'm going to be watching carefully for that. It doesn't seem that this Omicron subvariant is causing you to become more ill than the original Omicron, but it's something that we're watching, because it's, according to the data that we see now from the CDC, it looks like it is the majority of cases when you're being tested. Remember, not everybody is being tested for the particular variant that they have. So we're sort of taking a slice of the test and then extrapolating from there. And in doing that, the CDC is saying that there's a large amount of infection due to this subvariant now in the United States. So we'll see what we learn, quite frankly, another wait and see. I did see a note, and this is in the NPR article I was reading, that said that the CDC has not detected any Delta variant in the last week. We've talked so much about Delta. So is Omicron really overtaking Delta? And are we moving through these variants rather than having them continue to circulate? One quick thing about the pandemic, and this was a question asked by Acre 8, Title 42. This ties into immigration. So one of the things that's happened on the U.S. southern border, it's called the Southwest border by Border Patrol. So you see Border Protection, you're going to see us use it in both ways. That when people come across the border illegally, they are immediately expelled under Title 42. That is a policy that was used by the Trump administration, continued by the Biden administration. It's a policy that existed to deal with health emergencies as a quick way to move people out of the country. So the conflict with this for some is that there are those that come across the border illegally but are seeking asylum. Once they're in the country, they're supposed to be able to pursue asylum. In most cases, they have been allowed to instead of being expelled. And quite frankly, there still is a large portion of people that are allowed to pursue asylum. But there are many, oftentimes the majority of those that are encountered coming across the border in a given month, that are immediately expelled. And the question is about whether or not this Title 42 will be pulled back by the Biden administration. And then we would no longer have that quick ability to expel people that are coming across the border. Border Patrol has had to make that call. So with this huge numbers of encounters that we've seen, historic numbers that we've never seen in modern data collection of people coming across the southern border, the real concern for Border Patrol now is, well, if you're not able to expel quickly, then what do we do? What about the resources that we may need, especially when we see the numbers go up as they typically do kind of in this early summer period? So you should watch for that. If you see anything from the White House about pulling back the usage of Title 42, the question is, well, is there any other policies in place to deal with the surging numbers at the U.S. southern border? And as we talked about, over the last week, we've seen, the majority of people coming across the southern border are from Mexico, Central America, and South America. But we do see people from all over the world attempting to do this, including those from Ukraine and Russia. And those numbers have come up significantly in the last 3 to 4 months. So a lot of different stories there to work through. That's going to be a big story. This is going to be a really big story. I'm going to tell you right now, immigration always comes up before an election. We have a midterm election in November. It's one of those topics that just fires up everybody of any political spectrum. And even if it's something that's been going on and we've seen the surging numbers, it hasn't gotten the attention in the news. This would be the story that I'd watch ahead of the midterm elections for sure. Okay, quick on politics, very quickly here. I've gotten a lot of questions over the last couple of weeks about Hunter Biden. And let me just give a big overview of this, okay? Because there's no way to go into the nuances of all this story in the short period of time that we are. But why does anything related to the president's son matter, right? Like, what is really at the core of this? There's a question about Hunter Biden, abuse of his position, abuse of power, and whether or not he's done anything illegal in kind of this shady business practices is really what some of an investigation is focusing on. A broader question is, though, whether or not any vulnerabilities of a president's son or daughter could lead to vulnerabilities for our country. So could President Biden's love and protection, his desire to protect his son, overshadow his priority to do the same for the country? And that's really what's at the crux of these stories when it comes to anybody's child related to those in power, but specifically to this one. So important to know, Hunter Biden has not been charged with a crime. There are allegations, an investigation that's been ongoing for several years about his business practices. This was highlighted because of that laptop. Do you remember that story about the laptop going into the election? Apparently, one of his turns his laptop in to get fixed and pick it up. Suddenly the Hunter Biden laptop is an issue. Like, where did this laptop come from? There was all sorts of debate about this story. Republicans seized on it and said there's stuff in there that really matters, that shows that the presidential nominee's son is going to be a vulnerability for our country because of his business practices. Democrats said no. And actually, some social media accounts completely shut down that story. What we're now learning, according to, and this is why you're seeing this story now more, the Washington Post and others actually got what they believe is purportedly a copy of the hard drive of that laptop. They've now looked through it, and they're finding things that are raising questions about Hunter Biden's business practices, not with necessarily just other people, but countries like Ukraine and China. And so this is why you're seeing this now. Where does this story go? How important is it? Tough to know. Tough to know at this particular time. It appears that the investigation is picking up steam and could be leading towards an indictment. That's why you're seeing this story now. Then you got the journalists on top of it that have the hard drive that are now finally looking through it and saying, oh, wait a minute, there might be something more here. So this is why you're seeing this story now. One of the things to keep in mind when we're talking about, let's say, Hunter Biden's interactions with a Chinese company, which is something that came up with the Washington Post, is in a place like China, the connection between the Chinese company and the Chinese government is very close, maybe one and the same. And so then there's a question about whether or not Hunter Biden, some of his associates should be have established themselves, should have talked about their business dealings more transparently, because they were dealing with who could not only be business people, but part of the Chinese government. I know it's a little bit confusing. It has to do with whether or not someone should register as a foreign agent. And that we can dig in deeper into that if we see more about this story come out. But right now, a lot of what you're also seeing are still reports. A lot of reports, unnamed sources, purportedly the hard drive. We don't have charges yet. We don't have an indictment yet. And that's what we're going to be watching for to see if this actually happens. In the meantime, I also, just because we do keep it balanced, ahead of the election, we talked about Hunter Biden's laptop, but we also talked about charges or an investigation into former President Trump at the time. Now you have the January 6th investigation that's also ongoing. But I just want to focus on this. There were civil and criminal cases against President Trump, investigations about whether or not these cases were moving towards something more serious in New York, about whether or not he exaggerated the worth of his company, worth of his assets, whether or not he lied, whether or not this was fraudulent. It looks like now the criminal case that was centered in New York City it does not seem to be moving in the direction quickly towards an indictment. There was all of these conflicts between the district attorney and the prosecutor. The prosecutor said he had a case. The district attorney, who's a Democrat, said, I don't know if we got the case. And so that's kind of fallen away. The civil investigation is continuing as well, though. And that's where we're wondering, will President Trump and his son and daughter, for example, have to participate in this investigation, have to participate in this case? So that's still around, you know. Just so some context, having worked as a reporter in New York City for many years, and also worked at a place like Forbes, which deals all the time with money, you know, the question about whether or not the Trump family was exaggerating their assets has always been a question for decades, because they're not a public company. We don't really know what their assets are, and it's illegal to exaggerate. You can't just exaggerate. You can't, you know, what things are worth. But there are business practices that allow you to estimate. You know, we're gonna need a whole host of different people to work through that. But I do want you to know those two things are ongoing. For those of you who asked about the January 6th investigation, one thing of note is that what the committee's talking about this week is that, you know, anything that a president does is a matter of public record. And there appears to be a certain period of time where President Trump's correspondence over his phone are missing for 7 or more hours. And so there's a question of during the January 6th riot on Capitol Hill. And so there's a question of, well, he's not on the phone? Did he not talk to anyone? Where are these records? Was he using a different phone, a burner phone? President Trump in a statement said he doesn't know what a burner phone is. I'll leave that to you to decide. But that's one of the focuses of the investigation now. President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is actually participating in the investigation with the committee this week. So more on that. I'm very curious in the timeline of that, by the way. How long does this investigation go on? And how much is it a priority of the public? Remember, this is time and money, your time and money that's being used for this. How long does it go on before we get answers? And how long do the politicians involved believe this is politically advantageous to them to pursue it? Because that's part of the equation. Not only what's good for the country, but also who's involved in it. So, all right. How are you guys feeling? You feeling good? We got through a lot. I'm curious what you think about the Academy Awards. This is not a story that I covered initially at the beginning of the week. The slap of Will Smith to Chris Rock on stage live in the Academy Awards. I was waiting for more information. Some stories come up and they're not really news. You know, you look at it and you think, is there a news value to that? I mean, I don't know. Is there a news value to that? But as the week has progressed, I actually think there is a news value to that. And we're learning a little bit more about how the Academy is handling it, a little bit more behind the scenes. And there's a lot to this conversation. So I wanted to see if I could talk about it with a friend of mine, an Instagram friend of mine. I think I'm going to have to ask him about it. There's sometimes you meet people on social media. By the way, I just want to mention this to you guys, that oftentimes you write me and I actually start knowing who you are. There he is. And I'm like, oh, there's Rachel, or there's Sarah, or there's Los. And I feel like I know you. And then I feel weird.
Same.
Right, Carlos? I mean, I'm like, Los, like we're friends. I'm like, well,
Right.
we've never met in person.
I know.
Is that
I know.
okay?
It is okay. I feel the same way.
Well, wait, I have to ask you about your bio, Carlos, because I was preparing for you. This is serious.
Goodness.
I got my coffee.
I feel so important.
I do, but I wanted to give you a proper introduction because I want people to know that they could buy your books, they could look at all sorts of things, different content that you produce, including your podcast that I was listening to this morning. But this is what you have on your website: author, speaker, moment maker, spider killer, and hope dealer. Is that accurate?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we can go there. We can go there. I mean, obviously there always needs to be caveats to every introduction that I have. But
okay.
Yes, I'm not a professional spider killer, but I kill spiders in the soul is the goal.
So will not exterminate your house, but could exorcise you.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Now we're talking.
Now, we're going to hashtag that later. I want to see it on a t-shirt. Okay, so I reached out to you because I did. And, you know, this is something I want people to know. Like, I do reporting. You know, sometimes I'm looking through headlines and I'm pulling out some of the key facts, but I do reporting. Yeah. And sometimes I just like to reach out to people to say, hey, what do you think about this story? And like, how
Yeah.
could we really talk about it in a valuable way that's not just a
Yeah.
waste of time, which is a lot of
Yes.
the news, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So were you watching the Academy Awards?
I was about 15 minutes delayed. So I was watching live. Here's the deal. I was watching the US men try to qualify for their first World Cup. So that game was on. My wife, my daughters, and every other human in the house was like, "Can you stop watching? The Academy Awards are on. We want to see what people are wearing." And so finally I gave in. So we were about 15 minutes behind. And all of a sudden my phone started blowing up, like Twitter, just started like, buzzing, and I'm watching and I'm like, what's happening? And then and I look at my phone and everyone's like, what's going on? Because they knew we were delayed. My family was. They were asking me that, and I was like, can we fast forward to something really fast? So then we did, and then we all watched together. So yes, that's as live as I watched. It was about 15 minutes delayed.
Okay, so I wasn't watching the Academy Awards at all,
Yeah.
and I was trying to prepare for the week ahead.
Yeah.
And it was like 11 o'clock at night. The house was finally silent.
Yeah.
And I was on Twitter, which I, kind of use a little bit as a news feed. And I was like, what? This can't be real. And then that spiraled me. Like, just so many different directions. I didn't even know where to begin with it because I found it really, really, really upsetting. And then I got mad at myself for finding it upsetting because there's a lot of things in the world to be upset about. And I probably wouldn't put the Academy Awards in the top 10. I probably wouldn't,
Totally,
So
totally.
Right. There's a lot. So when we were going back and forth, we were talking about, there's so many different nuances to this story. And let me just say this at this point in it. So we know that the event happened. There was an instant reaction.
Yeah.
Now the Academy, the full name, Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Science, they are doing a review. We're not going to know about this review for a couple of weeks.
Right.
So what do you think the lead is here? Carlos, what do you think? Why is this story, it's continuing. There's coverage.
Yeah.
There's a continued reaction to it. What do you think it is about it? What stands out most to you about it?
I think for me, and you're talking about a guy whose Instagram is all about trying to help people navigate difficult conversations in a grace-filled way. That's what I try to do, on my account. And so the reason why this continues to go is that there's very strong feelings because of the lenses people have view life through, and because of the history that every single person that has lived their own experience has lived through. There's strong reactions to seeing a couple things that happened that night, right? There was the same feeling that you felt, Jenna, when you were like, oh, that felt gross. Like it was uncomfortable. And there's a reason why that we feel that way. There's a reason why everyone that's commenting right now feels one way or another way, because we all have lived experience. And some people may have been in a violent home. Some people may have seen, and so suddenly what that does is it sets them up to view that story through their lens, which is a completely valid lens to view that through. Other people have never had a man stand up for them in any way, shape, or form, have never had a friend come to their defense. And maybe they've not lived in a violent experience. So they're viewing that through their lens. So suddenly what happens is, and what I saw happen, which was actually something that I found was very interesting. People weren't viewing this initially, and it's starting to sway because headlines begin to pull people certain ways, right? And pundits begin to pull people certain ways. But initially, the first 12 hours or 24 hours of this story, people were waking up with strong opinions as to what they believed was right and what they believed was wrong. But they were shocked that maybe some people that they disagree with vehemently on political issues, they were agreeing with on this issue, and there weren't like party lines for people to line up on. So I think that's another valuable lesson to be learned here, is like people didn't know what to do when they agreed with somebody that they disagree with everything else on. And it was again, there weren't party lines to be standing on. This was human. This was a human story. And so yeah, that's what I found fascinating, and that's what I, for me, on my account, I'm trying to guide people through in the conversation is, hey, listen, let's listen to the people that feel one way to understand. And these people, let's listen to the people that feel this way to understand as well, because I feel like that understanding is the thing that's going to propel us towards growth.
Yeah, and in that way, positioning the story that way is really helpful, because you're right. There was an instant reaction, it was not just viewing the event, then it was a reaction after it. And you think people that would 100% come to Will Smith's defense were like very critical, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And, that was watching that reaction and then wondering, well, wait a minute, how did I feel about it? How did you feel about it when you saw it?
Yeah, I felt, and I think you can feel two ways and coexist with two strong emotions. The first thing I felt was kind of gross. That the word gross is the word that I like to use, that I've been using the last couple of days, because I'm like, oh man, like this is not the space that I wanted this interaction to happen in. Me as a black man in America, I'm like, I don't need another thing to have a conversation about, that I have to maybe balance and educate. Like, I just thought, oh my gosh, like another thing, like, so that was hard for me. Then another feeling that I felt in the moment was, man, you know what? Good for Will for defending Jada. Like I honestly had that feeling. Like, I'll let everybody know that feeling was there. And then I also had the feeling was like, oh my gosh, poor Chris. Like he has just experienced the most, shame-filled moment. And I'm an empath. So people that are hearing me talk right now, like empathy is just the thing that I do. So I automatically just take people's pain, put it on my shoulders, try to feel it. It is what what it is. It makes me who I am. But in the moment I felt gross. I felt, I actually, like, I'm glad she was defended, but then, oh man, this is not the way to defend her, right? So like all those feelings kind of came together at one time. And so I put a tweet up, and my tweet was like, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was something to the effect of, bad comedy is, I can't remember what the word was. Do you remember? Do you remember what I said?
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up because it was really good.
Okay.
I'm going to pull it up. It's going to take me a second. I'm like, it was really good, and I want to get the exact quote. So let me pull it up. But you can keep talking. I don't mean to interrupt you. I know that it's funny. No. We're seeing a lot of different reaction, even just on our live here, right? Some people are like, "Why are we even talking about this?" And listen, I agree. That's part of the reason why I spent 20 minutes talking about other news items. But there is something to this story that allows us to talk a lot about different themes that we've seen in the news, and one perspective, just to I guess bring up here, Carlos, and. Is this really just, maybe we are making too much of it? I mean, is this fundamentally just come down to, like, how do we treat each other? Like, what is the right way to treat each other? Doesn't matter your race, your age, your gender, your wealth. Like, how should we treat each other? Is that really what this story is about? Is this really why this matters?
Yes, and here's the thing: it may or may not be news. To be honest with you, like news as far as like newsworthy, but I think it's very worthy of humans to look at their reactions to what it was. Like, I just think, we can't continue to grow as individuals unless we start really examining how we feel about things. And I found what I said. I said, I'd love to see Will and Chris make this right. Lazy comedy is cheap. Assault is cheaper. Bad all the way around.
Just was looking at it. Yes.
Yep. There it is.
The idea of lazy comedy, I think, is also a good one. Can I share? Is a perspective I don't think that's been really brought in. And two thoughts. One is, when you're looking at a story, you're always looking at the different characteristics, like the who, what, where, what, how, and why. And one of the things that we talked about is that if you could, these guys were peers. They're peers in every sense of the word. When it comes to their age, they're both in their 50s. When it comes to their gender, they're both men. When it comes to their race, they're both black. When it comes to their profession, they're both, famous comedians / actors, serious actors in Will's case. They're both wealthy. Class is an issue here. I mean, this is not, they're all of they're professional people, and I was thinking to myself, just slide one of those out and take the less obvious one. Just make it that Chris Rock was 25. Instead of in his 50s, or make him 75.
It changes. It changes.
It change the story. Yeah. And it does it come down again to that question of like what how we're treating each other. But here's a part of it that I also really felt in the moment. I've been on live television a lot. I mean, that's my entire career is live television, and live television is scary in a lot of ways, because,
Yeah.
you say one thing wrong, your career could be over.
Yep.
Absolutely. And it could be something in the moment that you didn't even know. You made a mistake. And as a journalist, you make a factual error. But you also are dealing with guests that you can't always anticipate. And I've had to
Absolutely.
many times just have to say, okay, thank you. We're going to commercial. You have to get them
Yeah.
away, whatever it was. That's very difficult to do. And it's very uncomfortable. But
Yeah.
the way that Chris Rock handled this with
Yeah.
where he just tried to collect himself and keep going, and the fact that
Yeah.
nobody helped him, that
Yeah.
nobody came, like not even his stage manager, was the producer in his ear saying, Chris, are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, do you need us to come out there? Like, what can we do? There's
Right.
a lot of people working behind the scenes. Where were the people rushing to him?
Yeah.
I know he told a joke that not
Yeah.
everyone likes. I got it. He's a comedian. He was there
Yeah.
to roast them. That was what his
Yeah.
job was. So
Yeah.
that also, I felt such like I just wanted to like in that.
Yes.
I felt all the things that you also mentioned, right? Someone defending their wife and the honor, but also like this
Yeah.
is someone on live television that no one helps. That in his
Absolutely.
past, he's talked about being bullied and that he's had to deal with that. He's got one story he was telling, I was just saw it online, was that he got jumped like the same week that he got on Saturday Night Live, that he's always been picked on.
Uh-huh.
And then you
Yeah.
have him standing on the Academy Awards and no one
Oh,
helped
yeah.
him. Not even one person from the
Yeah.
audience,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I found that crushing.
And that's the human aspect of it, right? That is where suddenly the most vulnerable and potentially shame-filled moment of his entire life was broadcast for the globe to see. And so, where I start looking and what I start doing is like, I start thinking of 5-year-old Chris, right? I start thinking of like, as somebody that's done a lot of therapy work, that's done a lot of work, to my own inner healing, is like, wow, like here we go. Like everything really is rooted, and this could help some people that maybe thought that they showed up for a news brief, heal a little bit. But all of our adult triggers are rooted in some sort of childhood trauma in some way, shape, or form. Trauma can be massive. Trauma can be little. It can be something that your third grade teacher told you that you're still hanging on to, that decisions are being made later. But, you even look at Will Smith's biography that he released last year, and you look at a lot of the themes that run through that are things that happened and shame that happened in his childhood about not protecting his mother when she was, when she was being abused by her father, all of these things. And so suddenly, like, a lot of people like to say, this should have happened, period, end of story. But there's never an end of story when it comes to who we are as humans, right? So, like, I look at it and I think, like, what Will, that may have been 7-year-old Will that suddenly rose up in a moment and acted in a way that a 7-year-old should have instead of a 55-year-old should have, right? So it's like, that was not approved behavior. That is not something that should have happened. But when I love to start digging beneath what is there and start thinking about who Will was as a child, who Chris was as a child, there's a lot out there, as well. And so again, then we start thinking about how we're reacting to the story. And I wonder what in my life is causing me to view this in this certain way, and why somebody else may view it in another way. And I think that's the most important thing that we can do in this moment, is not just stick our flag in the ground saying that this is what I believe, this is what I look at like on this issue, but really ask questions and listen to other people to understand. And I think it just helps us grow.
So you have this podcast out. It just came out, and it's with the aunties, right? Is that how? Yeah. and
we call them the aunties.
Yeah, I was only able to listen to a portion of it this morning, but the portion that I did, I was like, wow, that's something I didn't even think about, which is no one's talking about Jada. And that was where they went, which was like, what about Jada? Like, no one's really, it's all about these two guys. And what does that tell us about how we're looking at the story? Tell us a little bit about that conversation. What surprised you about your conversation about this with some people that you actually know?
Yeah, absolutely. So immediately, the story happens. I put my opinion out there. I'm viewing it through the lens of my lived experience. And then, the next morning, I had a lot of people on my Instagram DM me, because I do a lot of education on my Instagram just about, racial reconciliation and things of race. And so I had a lot of white women asking me on my Instagram, hey, this morning, suddenly it shifted. It went from like this behavioral issue that happened last night to now it's about like race and like why is that, Carlos? And so what I did is, instead of answering that question myself, I said, let me ask the Black women what they feel like. Let me bring in my trusted community. And so I did. We call them in my little circle the Black aunties, because they're all aunts, and they are like grace filled, just incredible human beings. So I invited them onto the podcast, and I said, hey, what do you guys think about this? And suddenly the conversation wasn't about Chris. It wasn't about Will. It was about Jada. It was about the trauma they've experienced living in primarily white spaces a lot of their life, and people touching their hair, and why there's a lot of trauma locked into, Black women and their hair, and maybe toxic masculinity, and maybe Black masculinity, and how maybe they haven't ever felt protected by Black males. And so there was this conflict of emotion of like, wow, I felt like I've never had a Black man protect me like I saw Will protect her, but ooh, I don't know if he should have protected her that way, right? So here we are coexisting with different feelings about the same thing. So that's why, I want people to listen to the podcast so that they can hear a perspective that maybe they're not looking at. And I think it was a conversation that was done in good taste. It felt very reverent and holy in a lot of ways. I can't remove my faith from any conversation that I have. I'm a Christian. I believe in, the Holy Spirit, and I believe that we should act certain ways. So even in my Christian faith, is there an expectation that I have for somebody that doesn't call themselves a Christian to behave like a Christian? So we talked about all those things, and people want to listen to the conversation. You can just search for Human Hope anywhere you listen to podcasts, and I think it's going to be a very enlightening conversation.
Absolutely. So 2 final questions for you, because you mentioned 7-year-old Will, and you're a dad. You're also a dad. Of all the things I read, I should include that. Husband and father. Very important roles in your life. Obviously, we understand that there's a lot of different angles to the story, but how would you explain it to a 7-year-old? Like if my 7-year-old, I have a 7-year-old, sees the footage of this, how do you explain that?
Yeah. First of all, we know that kids are going to see things that we don't want them to see. So first of all, I'd be like, maybe let's not show a 7-year-old the footage of what happened. For me, but then knowing that 7-year-olds have phones now, right? Like, they're looking at things. I definitely would, I would come to it from a point of the one thing that they see, that they're going to see in this moment, is the violence. The one thing that a 7-year-old is going to see, they're probably not going to be able to nuance a conversation about, well, there was a joke made about a why, so I think that the conversation has to be in the moment with a younger child of like, this is not how we resolve situations where we disagree. Probably the best way to have resolved this is to have a conversation. Violence is never going to be the answer. It is not in any way, shape, or form the answer. And so, I don't want my 7-year-old to have somebody make fun of them and then go up and deck them. Like, that is just not the response that we want. Also, I think there could be a little bit of, I think sometimes we don't give our kids the credit that they deserve for the ability for them to process some information. I think it is okay to say, this is why that reaction happened. Like this man made fun of this man. And so there was something that this guy did that wasn't kind, that wasn't good. And so your words matter. Your words hurt people. Your words actually affect somebody's heart. It affects their soul. And so I think you're able to approach that conversation as a parent or as a father from both viewpoints.
That's one of the things we talk about in our household a lot, is that words are powerful. My kids, sometimes they repeat it. Sometimes they repeat it back to me at times that I wish they didn't. They always do that. These children, they're so smart. Getting a lot of great comments from some of our live audience. And this one from Lisa strikes me because it goes to words. She said, Will could have walked on stage, grabbed the microphone and said, I love my wife. She's beautiful with hair and without hair, and then walked back to his seat. And it would have been a completely different moment. That's it. Of course, there's a million things we could pull in and say, this could have gotten better, but maybe there's the little rhyme where, we said it all as kids: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That is just the worst rhyme ever. Please do not teach your kids that rhyme, because it's just not true. It's true. It's true. And you know what? Even in my
mature age at this point. Carlos, there's moments online, like with strangers, they say things to you and you're like, that was horrible. I'm going to need a couple minutes to like get myself composed. And you feel like you should be so much tougher. But the reality is words are powerful. And maybe that's sort of the interesting takeaway from this conversation, which is maybe stories are not necessarily all about the headlines. This one will continue because we're going to get something from the Academy Awards. There will be a continue. There will be more. It's more of like the stories that give us the opportunity to explore a couple different angles, but also maybe the story more is us, you know, what the story is teaching us about us and what we're thinking about, you know, related to it, which is one of the great things about news. It's really the story of our lives. And we're not isolated, you know, we are connected in more ways than we think. And that's what I'd like to ask you about just finally is, you know, with your faith, I do think that's something that we don't talk enough about in the news. And listen, there's a lot of people that talk about faith. I, as a journalist, don't think my job is to do that. Right. But if I'm including all angles, my job is to do that, is to mention faith. Yeah. And there's been so much, I mean, over the last 2 years, pick a story that have challenged us to our core. I talk about this actually with our expert on China. We're going to see this interview tomorrow. You know, you think of someone that's a policy expert, we've been challenged to define ourselves, what liberty and freedom really means, who we are in the universe, how we're going to treat people, what our expectations are for how they treat us. And I can't help but think that we're being called to rise to that occasion. That this confluence of news isn't a coincidence. We're being forced to do that. And so I don't know, I just would love your thoughts on that and how you think about it, you know, how faith works into all of this. I mean, look at all the terrible news that we're seeing on a regular basis. It is a lot to process. So how do you look at it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I can't even fathom looking at the news without the lens of my faith, right? I know there's a lot of people that follow me from various faith backgrounds, a lot of people that follow you from various faith backgrounds. And so for me, I mean, my faith is such a big part of who I am. I can't see anything without seeing it through the lens of my faith, which is why when I see a story about Ukraine, or when I see a story about the pandemic, or when I see a story about the presidential election, all of that is filtered through the lens of my faith. When I see a story about Will Smith and Chris Rock, all of that is filtered through the lens of my faith. All of that, you know, and so for me, I'm like sitting here going like, okay, how am I going to view who Will Smith is in this moment through the lens of my faith? Guess what? Suddenly compassion has to enter the story. If I am talking about being a follower of Jesus, which is who I am, then suddenly I can't come in with my finger blazing and cancel the guy, right? When I look at Chris Rock, like if I'm looking through the lens of Jesus, I suddenly can't come in and cancel the guy. So looking through the lens of my faith, suddenly it becomes a lot harder, to be honest with you, because my humanity without my faith makes it so easy to just come in and be like, that's it, end of story, get out the way. Well, no, actually things become a lot more nuanced. And now because I'm viewing it through my faith, there's a lot more work on my end that I have to do because according to like what I read in the Bible, for me, like if I'm going to try to live like this guy named Jesus, man, it's going to take a lot more than my initial reaction, my hot take. It's going to take a lot of digging, and it's going to take a lot of empathy, and it's going to take a lot of work for people to see me how I want them to see me. So I mean, you know, whatever. That wasn't a very pointed answer, but it's how
I thought it was a great answer.
Okay.
We're not judging you.
Yeah,
we're not that. No, have you found that people have been more open to that, to hearing about faith during this time, Carlos, compared to other times that you've been? Do you feel like there's an openness to that conversation, or do you feel like there's a resistance to it?
Yeah, no, I feel like there's an openness to the conversation. If anything, I think people are searching for more. If anything, these days, I feel people are like looking for a glimpse of hope and humanity. I feel like people are like, there has to be more. I think people are actually tired of hating each other. I think people are tired of the fighting. I think people are ready to be like, you know what? There has to be a way that I can view somebody else without it being just through the lens of my political filter or through the lens of whatever party lines I fall on. I mean, people are just tired. And so I feel like people are open to it. You know, when I talk about my faith, I've got, again, a lot of people that aren't from my faith background follow me. But my faith conversation doesn't bother them, right? They're looking at like, that's a good human. That's a good guy. There's something inside of him. And they're okay, hearing it. Now, I'm not a fire and brimstone guy on my Instagram. I'm not constantly putting up Bible verses on my Instagram, but I am allowing people, when they ask me, to like, what is different about you? I'm like, hey, well, guess what? What you see that's different about me is my faith. It is what I believe. It is because I'm trying to be more like Jesus. And, and I think it's okay. And I think people are willing to explore that conversation.
Absolutely. I see one, Dania saying, I'm so tired of the left and right always making it about their beliefs and not digging deeper. Not digging deeper. There's a lot of opportunity to dig deep. I mean, we're really, like I said, we're really being challenged. Okay, go ahead.
Nope, that's it. Nope, I'm disagreeing.
Okay, I didn't know if I was interrupting you. So, Moment Maker, Kill the Spider, Enter Wild, your books.
Yeah.
But does that include the book that you're working on?
No, that book that is coming out in January of 23. And I've not told anybody what it's called yet, but I'll let your listeners hear first. It's actually called, do you want to hear it? Let me get okay. So the breaking news on Smarter News. The book is called, it's called How to Human, 9 Ways to Share Life Beyond What Distracts, Divides, and Disconnects Us. So that's the book that's coming out in January of 23.
That's amazing, Carlos.
Thanks.
That sounds awesome.
I feel like for such a time as this, everyone's trying to figure out how we get back to how to do this human thing right. And hopefully it's going to help people get there. So,
well, thanks for letting us giving us that breaking news. And it sounds like a great smarter guide, if you will, like something that you could pick up and get something. I like it, Carlos.
Absolutely. Yep.
We're getting a lot of people loving that title. So we're really excited. So you're going to have to, leading up to that, we have to, we'll do like a lesson on how to be human.
Let's do it. Let's do it. How to human. And again, the book is divided into, different 9 ways, right? Empathy, compassion, all the things that we're lacking, and just helping people get back there.
I love that. Smarter Humans. It's going to be the name.
Smarter Humans. There it is. Let's start our own news network.
We've done it. It's over. There's nowhere else to go from here. I think that's
so good.
Thank you, Carlos. This was so much fun. I really appreciate it. Really.
So good, Jenna. Thank you, friend. Really appreciate everything you do, just the way you do it. And I constantly am encouraged by the way that you report and do your job. You do such a good job.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah. I do feel like it's a calling, and I think we can do it better. So we should do it smarter. That's it. Quick, concise, not partisan. It's actually harder to not be able to see someone else's opinion these days because we have this thing called Google. So it's, I just want people to, get what they need and then get on with their own lives, because the job of the news is to support you with current events so that you know what's going on, but then you have to live your own story. And it shouldn't be the news that's dominating that. So anyways, that's my thoughts. All right, Carlos, it's great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, friend. Thanks for your time.
All right, guys. Well, that was super fun. And we got some exclusive news. We have to make that more of a thing, that at the end of one of our debriefs, we get breaking news. I love that book title, though. Sounds like something I need immediately. Maybe we can move up that publish date, Carlos. Sounds like kind of how to be a better human. That would be great. Like maybe summer reading. I don't know. I don't want to rush him. It's a lot to write a book. It's a lot to write a book. Well, guys, I really appreciate the time today. There's been a lot. We've definitely covered a lot of ground, and it's fun to have a little bit more of a conversation about one of the big news stories. So let me know what you think. Questions and comments, always welcome them on social media. Otherwise, you can email us, hello@smarternews.com. And this debrief is also going to be available on YouTube, and it will also be loaded to podcasting platforms. So if you're catching us midway through, you want to get to the beginning, it's easier for you to do off of social media, or you need a break from social media, because let's face it, we all do sometimes. I just want you to know that there's multiple ways for you to get this content. All right. Well, I'm going to jump off. We got a bunch of news stories to cover. We're working on our weekend newsletter and finishing editing this interview that I think is really, really critical for this time when it comes to foreign policy. So I'm excited for that. But thanks for being my inspiration. A whole part of Smarter News is a smarter news delivery. It's about better customer service. It is about serving people. It's not about making the news about the person that's delivering it. So thank you for being my inspiration. You are on a regular basis, and I'm deeply grateful. All right. Have a great day wherever you are, and I'll talk to you soon.
Quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing smarter.